Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to AlphaBiolabs' webinar entitled Discover the Latest in Drug Testing. Thanks very much for joining us all here this morning. So my name's Andrew Priestley, and I'm the Marketing Manager for the legal sector here at AlphaBiolabs, and I'm delighted to be joined today by my two colleagues. We've got Ashley Hodgkinson, who's our company trainer, and Ashley also heads up our sample collections team. And we're joined also by Samantha Evans, who's one of our toxicology reporting scientists. So in terms of the agenda, broken it down into four sections. I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the latest trends in illegal drug usage. And then with Ashley going to talk about the sort of main factors to consider when choosing a drug testing provider. And then Sam is going to talk to us about how to interpret our court-approved drug test reports. We then, as we always do, have a Q&A session at the end. We have received some questions already as part of the registration process, so those questions will be answered for you. If you think of any other questions during the webinar, then you can use either the question and answer facility on the Zoom technology, or indeed the chat function to ask any questions that you have. And we'll do our best to answer them all during the live webinar. If we don't get a chance to answer some of them, then don't worry, we will send you an email with an answer at some point today. So please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Right, okay, to set the scene really. So 12 months ago, we did some drug testing webinars, and I talked about the latest trends in illegal drug usage. And I focused on this report. So this is a regularly updated report from the Office for National Statistics. It's entitled Drug Misuse in England and Wales. I think last year when we looked at it, it was data up to June 2022. You can see on the slide here, it's now been updated data for the year ending March 2023. And I just highlighted there some key facts really. So what we saw from the report was that just under 10% of adults aged 16 to 59, which is approximately 3 million people, and 18% of those aged 16 to 24, which is approximately 1 million, had used illegal drugs in the previous 12 months. So that's used it at least once in the 12-month period. And just over 2% of adults in the 16 to 59 years age group reported being frequent user of drugs. So they were using them more than once a month in that past year leading up to the end of March 2023. The report also said that almost 8% and 15% of adults aged 16 to 59 and 16 to 24 years respectively used cannabis in the previous 12 months. And just over 3% of adults aged 16 to 59 and 6% of adults aged 16 to 24 had used Class A drugs at least once. So what does that mean? Well, hopefully this graph sort of explains in a bit more detail, and there's a couple of useful pieces of information to tell you about there. So the graph shows the proportion of people reporting use of any drug in cannabis in England and Wales. And this is actually for a 10-year period, finishing in March 2023. So you can see there's four lines on the graph there. If we start by looking at the two towards the bottom, the blue and the red. So the blue line is for the full 16 to 59 years age group for any drug, and the red line is for the same age group, just for cannabis use. And you can see there that for both any drugs and cannabis, it's been fairly consistent over the 10-year period. Probably slight increase leading up towards the start of the pandemic in March 2020, but generally the sort of level of usage you would say over that 10-year period has remained consistent. But what is interesting, if you look at the two lines higher up, the grey and the yellow, that's for the 16 to 24-year-old category. So again, for any drug, we've got the grey line, and for cannabis only, we've got the yellow line. And we can see that for that age group, it's fluctuated a bit more in terms of the percentage within that age group using those drugs. And what's really interesting is since the pandemic in March 2020, you can see a significant dip for that age group. So whilst that's quite a positive note for that age group, the sort of general level of drug usage has decreased a bit. because for the overall age group of the 16 to 59-year-olds, because that's remained constant, that unfortunately means that those in older age groups have probably, on average, increased their drug usage the last 3, 4 years. So that is absolutely a cause for concern. Now, you've probably heard a lot in the press recently about the new psychoactive substances, or NPS, or designer drugs. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. We didn't indeed give you an update on this 12 months ago, but you probably heard of things like Calvin Klein and pink cocaine. They've been around for a while now. So Calvin Klein is basically a mix of cocaine and ketamine, and pink cocaine actually doesn't have any cocaine in it. That's a combination of ketamine and MDMA, or ecstasy. And those drugs have been around for a while now, and we see increasing usage of those drugs in the UK. So they're definitely to be mindful of. And then we've got the other sort of types of NPSs, so synthetic cathinones, which are basically stimulants. So they mimic the effects of taking cocaine. So you might have heard of some of these. So MDPV, which is actually more commonly known as bath salts or monkey dust. You then got synthetic cannabinoids, which are like a depressant. They're there to mirror the effects of cannabis. Spice is an increasingly popular one, unfortunately, where it can be taken in a number of forms. An increasing type of way of taking it is in liquid form, where people put it in vapes and they actually smoke it through a vape. So it's things like that again that we all need to be aware of. And then you've got synthetic hallucinogens. So you probably never heard of these, but PMA and PMMA, they're basically, they sort of, again, they have the same sort of effects as ecstasy or MDMA or LSD, things like that. Often they're sold as MMDA, but in fact it's PMA or PMMA. So people are buying things that actually are not what they believe they're getting. A really increasing concern at the moment is the use of synthetic opioids. Fentanyl, you might have heard about. That's been really bad in the US. There was over 70,000 deaths in the US alone last year from overdoses from fentanyl. And unfortunately, we are seeing it increasingly being used in the UK as well. nowhere near the extent of in the US, but nonetheless, it's something to be aware of. And then nitazines. Nitazines is another type of synthetic opioid. They're often manufactured in places like China. They can be sold online, even on social media platforms such as Twitter, or I think it's called X now. They're sometimes smuggled into the UK in things like dog food. So again, being aware of things like that is really important. And I've put on the table there the relative potency of fentanyl and selected nitazines in comparison to heroin. Now, we know heroin is bad enough in that it's a Class A drug, but fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. And then also listed there 4 different types of nitazines in the purple, and they range from 50 times more potent to 500 times more potent. So something really to be aware of in terms of the use of nitazines in the UK. And this slide, unfortunately, does show that in an 8-month period from June 2023 to February 2024, there's been over 100 deaths reported in the UK from overdose from nitazine use. And sadly, you can see there the geographical breakdown. It's not restricted to one particular area. It is quite prevalent across a wide part of the UK, really. So again, just need to be aware of that in terms of, looking at sort of trends of drug usage. Okay, so that was a bit of an opener, really. So I'm just going to now move on to what factors to consider when choosing a testing provider. I just thought I'd start by sharing our own standard drug panel. So absolutely crucial when you are selecting a testing provider is to look at the drugs that could be tested. So I've just listed here our own standard drug panel, which is actually the most comprehensive one you can get in the UK. As you see, there's 30 main drug groups there, and the top 6 in the purple are the most commonly used drugs in the UK, as you would probably expect, things like cannabis and cocaine, opiates, which includes heroin. And I've also listed there for you the different sample types that we can test for you. And Ashley's going to talk about those in a bit more detail in a moment. So you've got your head hair, your body hair, and your nail clippings. And we can also test using an oral fluid sample or indeed urine as well. So that's our standard drug panel. We also have a very comprehensive non-standard drug panel, of which, just referring back to the NPSs we've just been talking about, we can test for over 35 of those types already. And of course, we're always looking at what else is unfortunately coming into the UK, and we're looking at ways we can test that. So if you have any sort of concerns or questions, then please do get in touch with us, and we can advise you on that accordingly. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand over to Ashley, and Ashley's going to talk to you about collecting and analysing different sample types.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us. So Andrew's just spoke about the drugs that we can test for, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that and what your options are. So the first type that I want to talk about is testing a sample of head hair. Now, this would be an ideal method, the best method that we would recommend if you're looking at long-term use. And we're going to speak about some long-term use options and some short-term use options. So to be clear, hair drug testing is looking to identify persistent drug misusers. So we're not looking for people who have used a drug as a one-off, like Andrew mentioned in the crime survey. It won't be detectable for things like that for one-off use. But if you have a persistent drug misuser, then we can use a sample of head hair to have a look at patterns and trends within that drug use. Realistically speaking, we can test back up to 12 months. However, that is dictated by the length of the sample that your client would be able to provide. So if, for example, I was being tested today, my head hair is long enough to go back 12 months, whereas some clients might have shorter head hair, which would mean that a shorter time frame would be able to be applied. And this is something that you really need to consider when instructing a drug test, whether your client has a suitable sample for what you're looking to prove or disprove. So how we calculate the time frame that we can be able to provide for head hair testing is we use the average growth rate of head hair, which is 1 centimetre per month. So, for example, if your client had 3 centimetres of head hair, we could look back up to 3 months. If they had 6 centimetres, we could look back up to 6 months, and so on, all the way up to 12 months. Once we know that your client has a suitable sample available, we then need to decide how you want your report to look. And this, again, is based on what you're looking to prove or disprove. If you have a client who has abstained from drug use for the full time frame, then an overview analysis would be more suitable. Whereas if you're looking to prove patterns and trends within the use, either an increase or a decrease of use over time, then a month-by-month analysis would be more suitable. So we're going to have a look at each one of these individually to see what you would get results-wise and how this could be dictated by what you're looking to prove or disprove for your client. So the first option is to have an overview of analysis. So this, what you can see on screen here, is just showing you how we would do this. So the sample of hair shown covers potentially up to 12 months because it measures more than 12 centimetres. If you had this hair sample as an overview, we would report this in sections of 3 months. So we would give you one result for that 3-month period as a whole. So you would get 4 results covering 12 months. If your client had, for example, 3 centimetres of head hair and we were looking back 3 months, you would just get 1 result for that time frame as a whole. And this is why I was just saying, if you had a client who has abstained from drug use and is just looking to prove that they have done that, an overview analysis would be sufficient for you because you know what that result's going to state and that it would be negative for the time frame that you tested. So there'd be no need to break that down any further. If you had a client who, for example, had used previously, but had either been reducing or abstaining from drug use, then a segmented test would be better for your client because you're going to get an individual result for each month tested. And this means that you'll be able to prove that decrease in use over that time frame. So again, if we're looking at this sample on the screen, it covers 12 months because it's more than 12 centimetres in length. But we would report that as 12 individual results, one representing each month that we'd tested for. If you had a client who had 3 centimetres of head hair, you could still get your 3-month report, but this time it would be broken down into 3 results, again, one representing each month. So you can see how, depending on what you're wanting to prove or disprove, will dictate which type of test you would opt for. And then the third option is bi-monthly segmentation. So this is similar to your month-by-month analysis, but instead of doing each individual month, we do every 2 months. So for a 12-month sample, you'd get 6 reports, or 6 results, sorry, within your report, each covering a 2-monthly segment. So it's something to consider when instructing a drug test. And if you did come through AlphaBiolabs, we do have dedicated case managers who could help you decide which would be the most suitable analysis to go for based on what your client's requirements are. So this is an example of the different types. So you can see in the first column, that would be the time frame that you were requesting that was covered. You'd then need to check that your client had a sufficient sample, and that shows what length of head hair we would require for each one of the tests. We can then tell you what we can report on and what the type of test that would be. So for example, if we look at the first line, if you had a client who only had 1 centimetre of head hair available, we could report for 1 month as an overview. If you had a client who had 6 centimetres of head hair, you've got all 3 options available to you. We can do an overview where you'd get 2 results, each covering 3 months. We can do bi-monthly segmentation where you'd get 3 results, each covering 2 months. Or we can do it segmented month by month where you'd get 6 results in the report. So something to consider before instructing any drug test is what you're looking to prove, and then you can tailor that to which type of test you opt for. So that was briefly speaking about what we'd do in an ideal world where your client has 12 centimetres of long hair, and we can offer you a range of different options and timeframes, but that's not always the case. So in cases where clients have head hair that's too short for analysis, or they may not be willing to provide it for whatever reason, we do have some other options available to you. So body hair is an option, so we can test for drug use, underarm hair, chest hair, leg hair, back hair, whatever your client has, we'll take it. And this is going to provide up to a 12-month analysis. Now, this would be reported as an overview, but it would just be 1 result for that 12-month period as a whole. So because of the differing growth rate with body hair, we can't segment it month by month. We would only be able to report 1 result for that 12-month period as a whole. So again, something you want to consider. If you have a client who has maybe used drugs in the last 6 months, but before that they abstained and they want to prove that they abstained up until the last 6 months, body hair is not going to be the best option for you because you're just going to get 1 result for that time frame as a whole. And we can also test beard hair if you have a client who's willing to provide the sample. Now, this is dependent on the length of the sample. Potentially, we can go back up to 12 months, but depending on the length will depend on the time frame that we can apply. And that would be something we'd advise of once the sample got to the laboratory and we could measure it. This again is going to be reported as an overview for that time frame as a whole, so it'd be 1 result. So again, something to consider as to whether that would be suitable for your client. If they don't have body hair, we can use fingernail clippings or toenail clippings. Fingernails are looking back up to 6 months, again as an overview, and toenails are looking back up to 12 months as an overview. So 1 result for that time frame as a whole. And we need a minimum of 5 millimeters of nail from the client, and it must be clear from acrylics, gel, nail varnish, things like that, all of which we would advise your client of before we attended the appointment. So we spoke about long-term use, looking back months, be that 1 month or 12 months, but sometimes a more shorter-term time frame is what we require. And this is where your oral fluid and your urine testing comes in. So oral fluid is good for short-term detection. It's easy to obtain. It's just a sample of saliva, and it covers roughly 48 hours. So you're only getting a really narrow time frame here. But it's ideal if people are attending, for example, contact sessions, and you wanted a test done on the day of contact to ensure that they hadn't misused drugs in the previous 2 days before seeing their children. And that's the ideal situation for something like oral fluid. We can offer 2 options for this. We can screen your client on site, so we can give you a result there and then, covering 6 drug groups, or we can send it off to the laboratory where they would provide a full report, including the cutoff levels used and any level detected. So it's entirely up to you which one would be the preferred method for that, but we can offer both of those. For your urine testing, this works in a similar way. So again, short-term use, but this time up to 4 days for most of the drug groups. The only exception for this is for any chronic cannabis users. The results could potentially go back up to 28 days. So again, something to consider if cannabis is a cause for concern and what you're testing for. But this can be done with an on-site result. So where we would give you the result there and then, or we can send it off to the laboratory, the same as oral fluid, where you'd get that lab report with the cutoff levels and any results. Urine testing can only be done at the walk-in clinic or your offices. It can't be done at the client's home address, just so that we can be sure that the sample came from the correct person. However, oral fluid could be done at the client's home address if that would be your preferred collection location. So we've covered a lot of different types of samples there. So this is just a summary sheet to show you the window of detection for each type of sample that we can take, how far we can look back, and then whether it'd be a one-off test or a regular test. So all of your head hair, body hair, beard hair, and nails would be one-off testing because they cover quite a large time frame. But if you're doing urine or oral fluid testing, you may consider to do that more regularly so that you can build up a picture over time. But again, totally depends on your client's circumstances. And if you did have any queries, it's something we could advise you on as to what the best method would be. So chain of custody wise, we must ensure that there is a chain of custody at all times. So this is proving who presented as the donor at the time of the appointment. And Sam will talk to you a little bit about what's included on the report so you can see who attended. We also ask questions about hair colours, treatments, any medication they might have taken which could have affected the results. And where available, we would take a copy of photographic ID just to help prove who provided the sample. We will take the sample away with us from the appointment. It's never left with the donor, and we will track it all the way back to and then through the laboratory until your report is provided. It is a legally defensible chain of custody, so we would provide all of this information to you. And if ever there were any questions about who'd provided the sample, we could help support in the proof of the chain of custody as well. Sample collection wise, we can do sample collections in most places. So clients' home addresses, your offices, prisons, places of work, if there's a suitable room for us to use, wherever suits your client, we would be able to attend. We have a network of collectors that work up and down the UK who would come out to see your client. Or if that's not suitable, we can offer a collection at one of our walk-in clinics where collection would be free of charge. And we have 19 of those currently across the UK and Ireland. We aim to book all appointments in within 24 to 48 hours of instruction, providing that your client is available. But if you need a delayed collection to match your filing date, we can accommodate that as well and make sure it's booked in advance so you know that it's there and it's set up for when the time is right to see your client. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague Sam now, who's going to talk about the court-approved reports.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Evans, and I'm one of the reporting scientists here at AlphaBiolabs. And I'll be taking you through how to interpret our court-approved expert reports, as there have been some changes recently. So the first thing to talk about is there's the two types of reports. So we have the COA, or Standard Certificate, as it's also known as, which is simply just a PDF certificate stating the results with no extra interpretation. But our recommended report is called our expert report. Now, this contains in-depth interpretation of each set of results and contains any contributing factors that may affect said results. Now, this is the recommended type of report if any interpretation of the results is required, and I will further explain the details of the expert report in the next few slides. So our first page, we used to include the specific analysis requested, i.e. if it's hair, drugs and alcohol testing, etc. But we felt it was better for our title page to be very clean and concise, so we simply label all of them now as expert reports, as the specific analysis is explained later on in the report anyway. And we also detail the case number, the donor name, the instructing party, and then the reporting scientist that wrote the report. Our next slide then, we have moved the conclusion up from the bottom of the report to right at the very top, as we feel that this is what our clients want to see first and foremost, is what is the interpretation of the results, as that's the most important part of the report. So included in our conclusion is the interpretation of the positive drugs. So we go through, in this case, for example, the cannabinoids were positive. So we've explained through this that THC is positive in all 6 hair segments. And then we provide extra interpretation then, depending on whether, for example, hair cosmetic treatments have been applied, as these have the ability to lower the results in the hair. So this is vital information that we need at the time of sample collection. And then providing on the results and what we can say, sometimes we can assess some patterns of results. But again, if treatments had been declared, and this can affect the results obtained, the pattern can be skewed by these treatments. So any pattern assessments should be regarded with caution following the declaration of treatment, for example. And then we go on to the request of analysis. So this is very simplistic. This is just detailing the type of analysis requested and whether we analyse this hair sample that was actually requested. Now, if we don't analyse that for whatever reason, say the sample donor declined a scalp hair analysis, so we could only take body hair following agreement with the instructing party, we also detail this in this section as well. And then we have the approximate length of sample, the drug requested, and then the drug analysis requested. Again, if there's any differences in this section, we caveat this to say why that length was not able to be analysed. And the next section, we have the donor and sample information. So this includes the unique case number associated with the case. We have the sample donor's name, date of birth, when the hair samples were collected, and when the samples were received, so we can keep an eye on turnaround times. We have the chain of custody information, and we have the sample donor identification. This is can include sometimes when they have the driving license or passport. We also add that information in there. And then we have the sample donor identification in terms of the photo taken of the sample donor at the time of sample collection. And then we have the disclosures then, where it says everything was checked by myself or the reporting scientist that wrote this report. So this is a very important section next, which is the sample donor disclosures. Now, medications and substances are an important declaration, as these can affect the results obtained. And then sometimes we can comment on whether these results may be consistent with the declared usage at the time of sample collection. For example, in this case, if ketamine and cocaine was declared, we would add a comment in the conclusion to state that the one-off use declared would not be expected to produce a positive result above the cutoff, as we test for repeated use of a drug. So that's just that extra bit of interpretation we would add in the conclusion to address those declarations. Another important section is the external exposure section, as if the sample donors declared that they have been exposed, this is when we retain the washing samples, which can then be analysed upon request by the instructing party. And I will explain a bit further about these in the next slide. And the last important section, as I've alluded to previously when talking about the conclusions, is the hair treatment section, as this could have the ability to lower the concentrations in the hair segments. So again, this is very important that we get this correct at the time of sample collection. The next section is the drug analysis and results section. So this details the segmentation requested and details the approximate time period covered by each segment. So S1 is the segment closest to the scalp, so the most recent segment, and S6 is the segment furthest away from the scalp, so the oldest segment. And here is where it's detailed that we wash the samples to remove or minimise any external contaminants on the outside of the hair. And then these washings are kept by AlphaBiolabs if passive exposure is declared, so from the previous slide. However, it should be noted that this analysis is not always a necessity, which is why the washes are not analysed as standard procedure. For example, in most cases, if cocaine and all of its metabolites are present above the cutoff, which is strong evidence of direct use of cocaine, the washings analysis would not add any extra information in those instances. However, for example, if the cocaine and benzoylecgonine ratio was below 5%, the washings analysis may be able to provide further information regarding exposure and whether this is a significantly contributing factor to the results. And moving on then, the next section is the results slide. So the results are set out what we feel in a logical order. So it's easy to read, starting with the segment column, which details what segment the results correlate to. And then the analyte column, for example, in this case, the 3 cannabinoids we test for at AlphaBiolabs, which are THC, CBN, and CBD. And then we have the concentration of the drug found in the hair segment. Then the cutoffs applied. So we have 2 sets. We have the Society of Hair Testing cutoffs for repeated use. Then we have our laboratory in-house cutoff, so for those that do not have a Society of Hair Testing cutoff. And then we have the range column. So the range column, so the low, medium, or high range detail is derived from statistical analysis of positive samples analysed at AlphaBiolabs. So for example, a low value lies below the 25th percentile, a high value lies above the 75th percentile, and the median value then lies between the 25th and the 75th percentile of dynamically updated positive cases. However, it's really important to note that this does not refer to the level of or amount of drug consumed, because this is outside the scope of our accreditation and is only provided for guidance only. So essentially, it provided for any assessment related to past partner abuse. So this, for example, if the older segment's in the high range and the most recent segment in the low range, that could be attributed to potential reduction in use depending on the drug. However, as mentioned previously, with cosmetic hair treatments, this can skew the pattern. So any assessment made regarding patterns when cosmetic treatment has been declared should be regarded with caution. And then to finish it off, we have the qualifications and experience side. So this is simply the qualifications of the reporting scientists and what experience they have. And then we have the declarations. So the reporting sciences believes everything they have written is true, and anything that's subject to change will be changed upon request, essentially. And then following on from this, we have the technical information slide. So we start with the drug analysis information. So this is essentially the technical information related to the specific drug requested, and then the classification of each drug, for example. Then we have the hair growth phases, which explains about the hair growth phases and the average growth rate calculation of that we base our results on, which is 1 centimeter per month. Then we have the drug incorporation to hair. So it explains the incorporation via at least 3 pathways: from the blood, from the sweat and sebum, and from environmental exposure. And it explains the individual variation from person to person. And this is why we can't determine a frequency of use, essentially. Then we have the range of drugs detected, as I mentioned previously, with the range column. It's not possible to precisely state what the positive finding in the hair sample means in terms of the dose of frequency consumed by an individual. Then we have the external exposure and washes. So recently we've changed our technical wording for this to make it more easy to read, essentially. So I'll read it out now so we can sort of dwell on this. So with the environmental exposure to a drug and or direct contamination can occur when, for example, a person in an environment where drugs are being smoked or a person's body is in direct contact with drugs. If such passive exposure has occurred, it may result in the presence of drugs on the hair tested. But this is why the method used by AlphaBiolabs for the testing for drugs in hair involves initial decontamination of the hair samples through a series of washes. And when the hair is tested following washing, the reference to cutoff values and the detection of certain metabolites of the drugs in the hair can demonstrate active use of a drug rather than environmental exposure. So we feel that really hits all the points regarding the external exposure washes and how we have the cutoffs for repeated use of a drug. And then finally, we have the cosmetic hair treatment and thermal hair straightening. As I've mentioned previously, there are many factors that can influence the level of drug and metabolites in hair, including the use of hair cosmetic treatments such as dye and bleach. And with hair straighteners as well, this has demonstrated that this could also lower the results and skew the pattern of results in the hair tested. And then finally, we have the cutoff and result information. And this is just purely explaining that the cutoff for each analyte is compared against the cutoff level to which a statistically derived measurement of uncertainty allowance has been added to create the analytical cutoff, and above which a sample will be regarded as positive and below it would be reported as negative. And that finishes off the report. And now I'll pass you back to Andrew, who will go through any Q&As that you may have.
That's great. Thanks, Sam, and thanks to Ashley as well. Okay, so moving on to the question and answers session now to finish off. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we have had a few questions submitted as part of the registration, and we've had a couple of extra ones come in during the live webinar. If you do have any other questions, then please use the opportunity now to send them through to us, and we will have answers for you. Right, okay, so first question here, and again, I appreciate you might have covered some of this, Sam, but questions come in. So I have several cases where clients are stating categorically that they do not use cannabis, but are testing positive. Their partners are heavy users, so I need further understanding of how indirect contact will show up in testing and what questions I should ask.
So with our cannabis conclusions, we say that it should be noted from a positive THC finding or cannabis finding, and we cannot totally rule out the possibility that environmental exposure prior to collection may have contributed to the positive finding. However, as the cutoffs used by AlphaBiolabs are based on drug concentrations from patients to enable identification of chronic drug use, when a positive finding is obtained for a hair segment, it suggests the regular and repeated use of a drug. It also should be noted that cannabinoids, that they have a low incorporation in hair, and therefore, in our experience, it's actually not uncommon to report negative or low-level results, even when a sample donor has disclosed regular use. So therefore, external exposure alone is even less likely to produce positive results above that cutoff for repeated use. In addition, we have the decontamination of the hair samples, which is the multiple washes, and then we have those application of the industry recommended cutoff levels. So in that case, it's very unlikely that external exposure alone would produce positive results above that cutoff. However, if they are querying those positive THC results, further testing for clarification could include body hair analysis, as this is less likely to be an area that's exposed to external contamination, such as underarm hair, for example. And this may be able to evaluate further the possibility of passive exposure.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, question for yourself, Ashley. If we have a client who cannot be trusted to behave correctly at the collection, or if they do not speak English very well, are there any options available?
Yeah, so we get this query quite a bit, so much so that we've actually put this question now on our referral form. So if you did instruct us for anything, there is a little tick box on there where we can contact you for any extra information about how we can best help your client or approach the situation. So if they need an interpreter present, we can arrange that ahead of time and with help from yourselves to make sure that there's someone there at the time of the appointment, because it's part of our role to ensure that your client understands why we're there and what we're testing for and what the results could mean. And if we're not satisfied that they completely understand that, then the collection can't go ahead, because it's all about providing informed consent. So that's a really important point. If you have a client who's maybe got a tendency to not attend appointments, or I don't know, to be evasive with their answers or anything like that, it might be more appropriate for us to attend your office or for you to attend the appointment with us so that you can ensure that we're getting the best out of your client when we're there. Or they might be best attending our walk-in clinic. So if you think that you might end up booking multiple appointments where there would be charges incurred because they're not showing up to the appointments, then a walk-in clinic might be more suitable. It's a little bit more flexible for them, obviously, because they can come throughout the day at a time to suit them. but it also means that if they're unable to attend on that particular day, they can come the following week and you wouldn't be charged for it. So there's a couple of different options, and we discuss that particular client with you if you made us aware of it on the referral form.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, question for Sam. Are there any drugs being seen more regularly or trends in positive results? For example, has there been any interpretation for the NPSs yet?
So, as Andrew mentioned previously, there's a drug called pink cocaine, which usually contains ketamine and MDMA as the standard drugs, but can also contain caffeine, tramadol, 2CB. But as it's sold on the street under the name pink cocaine, buyers are actually likely mistaken this for cocaine. Another one we're recently seeing is a combination of drug called Calvin Klein. So that's a designer cocktail drug that contains cocaine and ketamine. And recently, we are regularly seeing positive cocaine results with low-level ketamine. So this could be attributed to the use of Calvin Klein, whether that's knowingly or unknowingly. And with regards to NPSs, so that's a new psychoactive substance basically means any substance which is capable of producing a psychoactive effect in a person that consumes it. And as Andrew mentioned previously as well, with the nitazines, which are the new synthetic opioids, and these were found in heroin samples in Bristol most recently, and they can be between 50 and 500 times more potent than heroin. So these are very dangerous drugs, and that comes with that is the increased risk of overdose as well. But with NPSs, they're constantly changing, because all it takes is a change or removal of a chemical structure, and all of a sudden it becomes a completely different drug. So, for example, in 2021 alone, there were 400 new psychoactive substances that were detected in drug seizures. So that makes it extremely difficult to detect specific compounds following analysis. So the interpretation for new psychoactive substances, whilst it's been improved by the Psychoactive Substances Act of 2016, it's still quite difficult for us as reporting scientists to specifically determine what NPS that person has potentially taken.
Thank you, Sam, for that answer. Okay, I'm just conscious of time now. Just got time for one more question for yourself, Ashley, actually. How long does it take for different samples to be tested, please?
So for urine and oral fluid, as I said, we can do them instantly at the time of collection to give you an indication as to the result. That'll give you a negative or a non-negative result. If we send that sample to the laboratory, or if you do a straight to lab test for urine or oral fluid, you're looking at 3 to 5 days for the results to be reported. If you are doing a hair sample, be that head hair, body hair, or a nail sample, you're looking at 4 to 5 days for those results. And that's from when the sample reaches the laboratory, not from the time of collection. So maximum 5 days for all sample types.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, there have been another couple of questions come in, but we are a little bit out of time. So what we will do is we will send you a personal reply to those questions if it's yourself that have asked them. But thanks to all of you for the questions you have asked as part of the registration and during the webinar today. Okay, so just to finish off then, there is a very short webinar survey that you'll see at the end of the webinar in a couple of minutes' time. If you could kindly just spend a minute completing it, there's only 3 or 4 questions in there, and your sort of feedback to us will be invaluable for the planning of future webinars. So if you could kindly take the time to complete that survey, it would be much appreciated. So just to finish off then, so we've covered a lot of this already, but why choose AlphaBiolabs? We offer competitive pricing, and a premium service is probably one of the key things. All our pricing is within legal aid agency rates, and we do offer a price match promise. So if you are speaking to other providers as well, as you often would do, we will beat any like-for-like quote by 5%. So if you provide to us a copy of the quote from the other provider, we will beat that price by 5%. Also, quotations will be provided within an hour of any request. As Ashley talked about, we can do sample collections from any UK or Ireland address, and free collections from any of our UK or Ireland centres. Drug test reports issued within 4 to 5 working days. And as Sam has explained, we're always looking to improve the user friendliness of our court-approved reports. You will get a dedicated case manager as well from point of instruction until the test report, and that person will be your main point of contact for dealing with any questions or queries that you might have. And of course, finally, we are a fully accredited laboratory for the UK and Ireland. We also have a special promotional offer on at the moment until the end of June for 15% off drug testing. So when you do request a quote from us, if you reference the code DRUG15, we will take 15% off the test price. Please do share this offer with your colleagues as well. It's not restricted just to yourselves for attending the webinar. It is available to all your colleagues as well. So please do share that information with them. So just to finish off, thank you very much for your time this morning. Hopefully you found it of interest. Thanks again to Ashley and Sam for their contributions as well. And please do get in touch with us. We are the experts in drug, alcohol and DNA testing. You can see our methods of contact on the screen there, including social media. If you're on LinkedIn or X, then please look us up on there and give us a follow. So all that's left to say again is thank you very much for your time and enjoy your day ahead. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on an AlphaBiolabs webinar. Thanks very much and bye.